consider this the free consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to Gurus Tony and Scott. You'll get 2 or 3 perspectives for each question that you submit. We do have great questions coming in now. There's room for a few more, again, if you're able to stick around with us for a while. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel. I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Scott, Tony, or myself to respond. So let's start with Dominique. You were the first one in the queue at the first poll. Dominique asks 2 questions. Let's take a look at which one we can lead with. Dominique, if it's okay, let's hold on the healthcare. It's a vertical application. I will come back to that after we get some other questions in, or we'll be happy to take that one offline. But since it's a vertical specificity here, we'll make it more general to the group, which is great for your second question. Please discuss implementations that involve multiple database sources, which I'm sure that's more common now with the variety V aspect of big data. There's so many streams that come in. It's seemingly disparate, but related. How do you tie those together? It's more of a data structure aspect than analytic, but you've got to be able to have these disparate, seemingly unrelated data sources join and make sense somehow in order to really get at the nature of the hidden information within. So let me start with Tony on this one, because Tony, sometimes when it's difficult to cycle with IT or to get data from different silos and the like, I think you'll often suggest an analytic sandbox. Can you get started with that, and then we'll head over to Scott?
Oh, absolutely. And I think for the purpose of developing our projects, we're always going to prefer having a data sandbox to work in rather than in the organization's production environment, simply because it allows us, one, to address a number of these issues on how we are going to both access and deliver results, and also to avoid creating problems with our overall production environment. And it is a major challenge today, and it's one of the reasons that I very strongly recommend that we take a team approach, so that we have the assistance of our IT departments who understand in detail how these environments actually function, what we need to do to make them operate, the timing that's going to be required, the load that's going to be required, both to access information. And in healthcare, it's very possible, as with a number of other environments, that we have real-time systems as well as batch operating systems, and it may require a data mart specific to support this particular application, just to allow for the time frame that's required in implementation. And these are all issues that need to be addressed in the planning of your project, and obviously they're very specific to the data environment. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of answer.
No, that's for sure. Great consideration. Scott, would you like to add?
Sure. What we're really talking about is the process of what's called data integration. And data integration is where you take disparate data from multiple sources and you integrate it into a single source. It's a common process that we work with in predictive analytics, and it's basically part of the data preparation process, or it's something that IT does prior to you getting the data. It can be as simple as, if we're talking about people, as having a unique customer ID, or it can be a science in and of itself. If you don't have customer IDs and you've got things such as names and addresses, then you have to figure out a way to match names and addresses, because obviously Joe Smith could be Joseph Smith, he could be Jay Smith, or he could be Joe Smith. And you have to have certain types of what we call fuzzy matching algorithms in order to match the sources together. But more common than not, within an internal organization, that data is already put together by the time you get it. However, there are occasions, and if you're dealing with predictive analytics, especially in the data preparation stage, where you do need to get involved with data integration. Now, key to doing that data integration, if you, the analyst yourself, are doing it, is that again, if your model lives in a different environment, a production environment that's separate from the development environment, you've got to make sure that you can replicate the same process. in your production environment. If you're using a certain fuzzy matching process within your development process, and you have a totally different process in terms of your production, then you're going to have different data, and different data can cause your project to fail.
Great advice, both. That's what's great about having both of you in for the different perspectives in the Q&A. And can you believe we're still between a half and two-thirds of the participants? So thanks so much for your interest in sticking with us. Tony, I was working very quickly here to pull up a certain slide because Shiramani asks, what is the difference between data mining and statistics? Is data mining part of statistics? And let me go ahead and flip a window up here that I know you'll want to speak to. And Scott, excuse me for having Tony lead again, but this goes to one of his slides here. And then the next question does point to content within your portion. Let's see if I can bring this up. Okay. So Tony, I guess you can speak to the slide and distinguish statistics from predictive analytics.
Yes, and I don't think that predictive analytics is a part of statistics. I think they're two separate fields, but they're also not competing fields. They're complementary fields. And as this slide illustrates, when we deal with the population and start doing some math and analyzing it and trying to generalize about it, statistics typically begins by doing some simple calculations on things like mean and standard deviation. And if you think about that, what it's really doing is describing the central tendency and the variance, the deviations around that we would see. And most of statistics is really involved with extending those basic concepts and talking about the population in general. In predictive analytics, what we're really focusing on is what a statistician would refer to as the outliers. We're looking for those low incident, high impact occurrences that tend to have a significant impact. People behave at different rates. We're not interested in a business environment typically with average performance, although we need the in general perspective as a beginning point. What we're looking for are those people who display a behavior at a significantly different rate so that we can adjust our resource allocations. And the more their rate of displaying that behavior deviates from the average, the more important they are to us. If we can find a way of consistently and reliably identifying those groups of people that behave at significantly different rates, we can get a significant enhancement in performance by adjusting our resource allocation strategies. That tends to be our emphasis in statistics, in predictive analytics. And what you'll find is that they need to be used in combination. The more we move into subgroups of the population that start to approach the central tendency, the more often predictive analytics doesn't work as well, and we start to fall back on more traditional statistical techniques because that's what stats is good at. The key is really picking the right tool for what it is you're trying to achieve.
I just wanted a raw competition there, but it sounds like you gave this question some consideration in the past, so thanks very much for that, Tony. Scott, do you want to add to this, or do you want me to go straight to the question that pertains to your content?
Your call. I have stuff that I can say, or we can go ahead.
No, by all means.
Well, I tend to. This is where you have the beauty of having different perspectives. Really, when we're talking about this whole thing called data mining and predictive analytics, part of it is science, but a lot of it is philosophy. A lot of it is approach. I tend to look at it a bit differently. I tend to think of statistics as being one of the three fundamental areas that we study when we're getting into predictive analytics. We study statistics. It's good to have some machine learning background or knowledge of some of the techniques that come from machine learning, and then the foundation of that being IT. I do view predictive statistics as being an overlap into predictive analytics. Not all statistics are predictive analytics, but not all predictive analytics are statistics, so there's an overlap into it. We do have certain algorithms that we use in the profession that come from statistical science, but then we have certain algorithms that we employ that come from the area of machine learning. So I tend to look at it a little bit differently. I do consider it to be an essential skill, a foundational skill that you have if you're going to be involved in predictive analytics.
Terrific, and definitely worth the add, and that's what we like about this, are the different perspectives, different experiences that you have. So thanks for adding to that. And before I go to the next question that pertains to yours, Sharamani asked, is there any online training for data mining? I do know that from a short session standpoint, a lot of people are fans of Coursera. So on the upside, you'll learn a few various methods and techniques, and a lot of the courses are very well produced. And it's a great way to get a grounding in what I would say are some of the trees. And we teach a lot about the trees as well, but in the context of the forest. And there's really not training available for the forest aspect that Tony was emphasizing, to ensure that we don't build technically accurate models that fail at the project level. So when it comes to online training, I would say, hopefully you subscribe to our newsletter, the Modeling Agency's quarterly newsletter, that will let you know later in the year about the Modeling Agency's classroom training that will debut online, and we've completely rewritten the content to be much more engaging, much more immersive. There will not be long lecture segments. There's going to be a core concepts component that is that can be taken asynchronously, and then we go into a very active cycle between short lecture, demonstration, and then breakout sessions where you actually reinforce your skills in not just building models, but building a project, and that's really what's going to distinguish this. Having said that the Modeling Agency will have the most engaging, immersive, and superior online training, I would still say that if you can get to the physical classroom, that's what you should make the investment in. If there's any way to get to the classroom, no matter how good the online training is, that's always going to be superior. So keep that in mind as you look for ways to elevate your effectiveness in analytics. On to the next question, and I think it has to do with resource constraints. Sharal asks, what if your sample is not too large to begin with? Pardon me. How can you divide it into multiple parts to have enough for each to arrive at your final destination? I guess if you have to divide it into train, test, and validate, and I know it's a relative question, but what advice can you give if you're kind of constrained with data? Let's start with you, Scott.
Well, the train, test, and validate is a fundamental best practice. However, that's not the only option that you have available for you. As you get a little bit more advanced, then you have other types of sampling processes that you can bring into play for small samples. One of those, and I'll just mention them at this point in time. You can go out and do your own Google searches for them. One of the most commonly used one is called cross-validation, which splits your samples up into smaller samples and works well with small data samples. Another one that's very commonly used today, again, it's a little bit more advanced than the fundamentals, is called bagging, and that's a resampling technique. But those are probably the two most prevalent ways of dealing with with smaller samples.
Outstanding. Thanks so much, Scott. Tony, anything to add?
Yes, just real briefly. Normally the reason that we don't have a whole lot of data available to us is for one of two reasons. The first is that we simply haven't been making these decisions for very long, and one of the criteria that we do have for the effective use of predictive analytics is to have a reasonable amount of history available to us. In those cases, we may simply need to wait a while and develop a history of how people behave so that we can build the mathematical models in an appropriate fashion. The other reason that often occurs, actually, is that we may have been making these decisions for some period of time, but there simply aren't that many occurrences of the behavior that we're interested in. In those cases, the problem isn't as significant, because what we really want to do in validation is to ensure that these models that we develop are going to work in the live decision environment. And one of the things that I recommend is that our validation studies be the equivalent of one decision cycle. So for example, if you were doing weekly mailings, we'd want our validation studies to cover a weekly time frame and have the decisions made in exactly the same way they were, with the same quantity counts that you would have in your weekly observations. So if you're doing something like fraud detection, you may not have very many actual observations of fraud on a weekly basis that you're using. Now, on the other hand, we do need a sufficient number of observations to develop the models themselves in our training data set. But I'm going to say that that number can be relatively small compared to what's commonly found in the literature. I normally work with about 5,000 observations in my training data set, but I've used much smaller data sets where I've only had a few hundred observations available for my training data.
Okay, very good. Scott, did you want to extend?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. Again, if you're talking about different sampling methodologies, bagging and cross-validation is something you want to look into if you've got small samples.
Okay, fantastic. All right, I'm going to wrap up with two questions from the same participant, Jason. They're phenomenal questions. So I'll answer one myself very quickly and then bounce the next one to Scott and Tony, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Jason's first question, how can low-level staff like myself who might have SPSS on our desktop transform the institution to see how impactful predictive analytics might be? Two things I would say. And then Scott and Tony, like I say, I'll go into the next question with a little more technical, and then if you want to address this at all in your response, go ahead. But I'm going to flip to the second question very quickly. But Jason, I'd say there's at least two things to consider when trying to get your leadership to adopt analytics. One is an executive level type presentation, one that is targeted toward analytic capabilities and limitations, and what are the extent of the rewards that can be had if you take the right path. If it's not just a tactical concentration, what are many different aspects that must be considered organizationally? And this might get leadership to warm up. Leadership that was seemingly going to always be driven by gut feel to be more open to be going from a data-driven decision model, especially when they see what benefits can arrive from it. So one would be an executive-level presentation. The other, which can often be motivated by the executive presentation, and Scott and Tony are highly seasoned, experienced trainers up to the keynote level that can speak to very, very effectively to the leadership in the organization and do an executive-level presentation if that could be invited in. The other is a comprehensive assessment that lets your organization know whether it's at the starting line for analytics, what steps should be taken to get to the starting line if you're not there, and charts a very specific path that prepares the organization for a low-risk, high-reward approach to analytics. And then it's most effective if there's a collaborative build of that project, that resulting project design. So that's essentially undertaking the plan phase that you saw in today's presentation. So the other part of the question that I'll push out to Scott and Tony, if I want to predict things that weren't even thought of, I want to be able to extract insights that can be actioned on. I'm not sure what that's called. I think it's called information discovery. And Scott and Tony, I don't know which of the two of you might move your mic a little bit. Somebody's breathing into the microphone. Thanks, that worked. So when I extract insights, I think they call that information discovery, and I know Tony will have some issues with that because you want to be led by goal-driven. If we find some interesting insights, they may not necessarily align with the goals of the organization, is the risk that you run with that. But I understand what you're saying. There's a lot of information that's hidden within there. We don't even know what it says, what it does. That's information discovery. I guess that would fall more under the term of research, and what can we, it's a technology looking for a home, which oftentimes doesn't work out well, but some of them may have interest to leadership, and it would have to be, I guess, presented in the right way. We prefer to run the other way, where let's list what the organizational goals are, can we find the resources to support them, and then what are other aspects in the organization that we can evaluate that might keep us from getting to a final implementation or to be able to make it operational, kind of bring any diffuse bombs in advance and determine what those can be so we have a clear path forward. But yeah, I would call that information discovery. And let's start with Scott. What's your experience when you approach something from an information discovery standpoint with predictive analytics?
Well, actually, I think I can tie both of those questions together. Having been an executive in several big companies, I can tell you that what we're always doing at the executive level is we're looking for ways to improve our business, whether that's through improvements in satisfaction, cost reduction, or revenue generation, or a combination of all three. So if you're looking to get an executive's eyes, one of the things that you can do quite often, in addition to what you were talking about, Eric, the presentations and the discovery process, is that you can actually ask for a project. You start out with an objective. What is a problem? Can you define a problem that predictive analytics might be able to address? And if you're an enterprising young, hungry employee in a company, then you can volunteer to take that project on your own time, and see if you can generate some results. That's a good way to tie both of those things together. But it's always objective driven. What is a problem that we can attack with this process?
Well, that was elegant and efficient to tie them both together in an efficient answer and recommendation. Fantastic, Scott. Thanks so much. And Tony, I guess this is kind of the intersection between business understanding and data issues to see what projects survive between the two. Where are the opportunities when you do some information discovery that can intersect with the organizational objectives? And I think that comes into opportunity identification. Did you want to extend to Scott's response in any way?
Yeah, just real briefly, and I want to echo Scott's response to the first part of the question and say if you've got a project that's appropriate for predictive analytics yourself, or if you can find one, just go do it. The vast majority of analytics is still being done in Excel. Something in the area of 80% of all analytics projects are completed inside of Excel. You don't need huge amounts of tool. Figure out how to make this work, figure out how to make it work effectively, and then let people come to you and say, how did you do that? Because you will get people's attention if it's done well and delivers significant results. In terms of finding new relationships, I think the key that I would point you to focusing on, there's a difference between coming up with some new approach to doing business and finding relationships in the condition attributes, what a statistician would call in your independent variables that people were unaware of. It's very viable to go through and find new condition attributes that people may not have been explicitly aware of that helps you in a decision process to make more effective decisions. What I would caution you against, at least in the early stages of this kind of work, is going out and trying to reinvent the organization and what they're trying to do by coming up with these new things and insights that you may have found in the data, and when what you're really doing is creating a completely new decision process and potentially a completely different way of doing business. That can be very high risk and in most cases is often just rejected as not being viable. I think especially in the early stages of projects, you're much better off with existing decision processes and trying to enhance performance. And in many cases, you're doing that by finding new relationships in the conditions that allow you to segregate these groups more effectively so that you can adjust your resource allocations to enhance performance.
Fantastic advice, both of you. Thanks so much. And at nearly 40 minutes after the hour with little less than half, I mean, that's phenomenal for some folks to spend that much extra time than we had asked for to stay with us. We really thank you for that. But at almost 40 after the hour, we better draw this event to a close. And I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your very active participation, as well as Scott and Tony for your great segments and, of course, your highly valuable Q&A contributions. So we'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and some suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. And from there, we'll hope that you've offered your permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter. If you haven't, you can subscribe just directly from our homepage at our website. and we hope that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. And remember that you can still reserve a space in the Los Angeles event if you move quickly, or secure the early bird discount for Washington, D.C. By Monday. Now, if you would like to benefit from your early efforts, instead of just reducing the bill for your organization, we can hand you up to $200 in Visa gift cards at the course instead for your own personal use. You can select which discount you'd like to receive in the online registration form, and don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor like Scott or Tony, you might be interested in the modeling agency's Wire Support program. A Wire Support is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up a Wire Support account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want. We'll guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Wire Support description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Tony, and Scott, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Lunch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.